Hi everybody, this is Rainer, this is Rainier Books, this is my booktube channel where I speak about books, and today I want to give you a single review. I've read a book that I want to give you a single review about that is so important and that really touched me so deeply that I want to share it with you in a single review. And this is Michelle Good's novel, Five Little Indians, that is nominated for the long list of the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Let's get started. Well, before I talk about Michelle Good's novel, Five Little Indians, I have to talk about residential schools in Canada. The residential school system was a system of, I think at the most, 82 schools that were running at the same time. Most of them in the western provinces of the country, in Saskatchewan, Manitoba and British Columbia, but also in eastern provinces like Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. There were 82 schools from 1876 to 1996. That's incredible. Until 1996. And these schools were schools where the goal was to get children of the First Nations, to take them away from their families when they were 5-6 years old, to snatch them away out of the arms of their mothers and fathers, to bring them to those residential schools that were run by the church, and to kill the Indian in them, quote unquote, to strip them of their cultural heritage, of their language, of their history, of the history of where they came from. This really was as cruel as it sounds. This is a horrible crime against humanity that still is being discussed in Canada, and Canada still has to cope with that past. There are so many people, 150,000 children who have suffered in those schools. 6,000 of them died in the schools. There have been bodies found in the vicinity of residential schools, and this sort of reminded me when I researched that a little bit. This reminded me a lot of Colson Whitehead's novel, The Nickel Boys, that last year was very prominent that also won the Pulitzer Prize this year. I think that The Nickel Boys and Five Little Indians have something in common, and this is how a white majority still treats, we have to say, the minorities in their country. And in the question of Canada, it was the First Nations of Canada that were treated very badly and in a racist and inhumane way by those residential schools and by the churches of Canada, who executed the will of the government. In 1876, the Indian Act was established by the Canadian government. The Indian Act defines the relationship between the Canadian government and the 614 First Nations of Canada, plus the Métis and the Inuit. And one of the points in that Indian Act of 1876 was the establishment of residential schools that had the purpose to, as I said, assimilate children and pave them the way into Canadian society. But in reality, it was horrible. It was mind torture. It was taking away children from their families, giving them the worst food you can think of, treating them like subhumans all the way, abuse them physically, sexually, and even kill them in many cases. And now we have reached the point where we have to talk about Michelle Good, the author. She is a Cree First Nation, member of the Cree Nation in Canada. She is originally from Saskatchewan, and she has worked as a lawyer for many decades, and she still does. And she works with survivors of residential schools to help them get their stories heard or try to get compensation for the pain and the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress they have endured and they still suffer from, and all that has been instigated by these consequences. So people today say, and they have said to her, just get over it and live your life. Forget it. Forget those residential schools. It was a bad time. Yeah, that's true. But it's over. It's not over. It still is here and it's everywhere. It's in the history of the people who suffered through these schools. And that is the base, so to speak, for where Michelle Good's novel, Five Little Indians, is running upon. There are 5 little Indians, quote unquote. We have Kenny, Lucy, Maisie, Howie, and Clara. Sorry, I'm sorry. We have these 5 people who have known each other. They have met each other in a residential school on Vancouver Island, which was run by the church. The people, the white people who were the suppressors, are just named brother and sister in that novel. And girls and boys were separated. They were not allowed to talk to each other. They saw each other from time to time, from fence to fence, but they weren't allowed. It was hard punishment if they would talk to each other. They were not supposed to talk to each other over the 10 years boys and girls went to that school system. And all of them have endured horrible things. Lucy, for example, was accused of lying. And there's a scene, and no, I have to say that, I haven't forgotten that. As you say in America or in the UK, reader and listener discretion is advised. This is hard stuff at the time. So if you can't stand this, stop the video now and go and see something else. But I think it's important to say that what has happened there. So here we go. Lucy is a girl who has, for example, made the experience. She was accused of lying in a residential school, lying to sister. And sister takes her to a room, shaves off all her hair in a very painful way, takes away her hair, and she puts a sign around her body, the upper parts of her body, which says, I am a liar. And that sign Lucy has to wear for days without hair throughout the school. Her head is bloody at some parts, and because the hair was not only shaved, it was removed in a very forceful way. Kenny has always tried to escape, and he really manages to escape in the age, I think he's 13 years old when he runs away from this residential school, when he's able to flee, and they think that he's dead, so they don't look for him anymore. He runs back to his mother, and his mother has been so damaged by losing her only son for 7 years, but that she is not capable of welcoming him back anymore. Her life was damaged too. And the relationship of mother-son has been destroyed forever and ever. We have Maisie, a girl who has been sexually abused by brother in the residential school, and when she comes out and lives in downtown Vancouver East Side, which is still a very difficult area of Vancouver and in Canada, for the whole country of Canada. She lives in Vancouver East Side, and she is letting herself getting raped by a much older man to punish herself for the abuse that she sort of feels a certain guilt for, that she has been abused by this man brother who represented the Canadian church system. And all those stories are braided. It's a braided narrative, and it's also a very beautiful narrative because it's a novel that is composed of the stories of these 5 people and what they have endured and how they try to cope with it and how they try to live and how much the past is always coming back to haunt them. We are shaped by the history of our childhood, and these 150,000 children have been shaped, and these 5 children and these 5 kids in the novel have been shaped. The story of Clara is a very beautiful story. She has been in a residential school, and she comes to Vancouver, and she starts working in the Indian movement to try to fight for the rights, and she is in a very close, in a very dangerous situation where she's trying to smuggle guns. That's the time of Wounded Knee. That's the time of where Alcatraz outside San Francisco was occupied by First Nation Native Americans in the United States. And Clara is lucky that she gets away from the police who's firing at her, who's following her, and she gets to a place deep inside of the nature, and she meets a very old native woman whose name is Mariah, and Mariah sort of strips her of her physical pain, but also of her mental problems, and makes her heal again with the powers of the cultural history, with the powers of the old ancestors who are connected to the present, and she gives her back a part of her cultural heritage while she spends a couple of months there. And there are beautiful relationships in that book between Clara and Mariah, for example. This young woman and this old woman, this relationship is beautifully described by Michelle Good. It's really heartbreakingly beautiful described. And I love the description of the dog. Clara has a dog. The dog's name is John Lennon. And John Lennon is one of the most beautiful depicted dogs I have read over the last decades in a book. So lovable. And there's the love, the romantic description between Kenny and Lucy. Kenny, who has been so damaged by the residential school, the runaway, that he's not able to live with Lucy. He always has to run away, and then he comes back to her, but he can't stay. He has to go. He's so stressed and that he has to get away. He has to be alone, and he runs away from her, and they have a relationship over decades. And this is also beautifully described, and a treasure of this book, I think. The relationships that Michelle Good has shaped between those people, the fictitious characters, are amazing. And she also describes what they have endured and what they have suffered in a very, very compelling way. So I like this novel a lot. I think it's very important to read for everyone who is interested in the relationships in North America between the governments, the countries, and the indigenous or the First Nation people in their countries. You can't forget the history, like there are attempts in the United States by the current government to change curricula for the history lessons. They want history to be taught in a patriotic way, where these elements of history would be wiped out, and that is not supposed to happen. And Michelle Good's novel, Five Little Indians, is one of the milestones to keep that history alive. And I hope that many people will read it. Until today, the Pope has not been able to say sorry for the treatment that his church, his Catholic Church, has given to First Nation people in Canada. That's also a horror story, isn't it? I hope that this novel goes to the shortlist. Whatever is on the long list, I haven't read anything of it, but I want Five Little Indians to go on the shortlist because it really deserves that. And then we will see. Thank you very much for watching this video. Write a comment down below, and as always, hope to see you again on my channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.